Like, a decision tree is easy to understand, but might not handle super complex stuff well. A neural network can handle complexity, but sometimes it's a black box. We don't know exactly how it's making its decision.
So trade-offs to consider. It's not just about accuracy, but finding the right fit for the problem. But how do we even know if our model is any good? It's like we train this detective, but how do we test their skills?
Good question. We got to test them on unseen data. One way is using a confusion matrix.
Confusion matrix. Sounds kind of confusing.
It's not that bad. It's basically a table that shows how many data points were classified correctly and how many were misclassified, like a scorecard for our model.
Gotcha. So we can see where it's hitting the mark and where it's missing.
Yep. From that, we can get things like accuracy, precision, recall. Give us a whole picture of how well our model's performing.
Performance review for our model, but instead of punctuality, we're looking at how good they are at solving those data cases.
Exactly. Now, let's shift gears to clustering. Remember, this is about finding natural groupings in the data, no predefined categories, like organizing a box of Legos with no instructions.
Letting the data tell us how it wants to be organized.
That's it. It's unsupervised learning. We're not giving the algorithm any labeled examples. It's got to figure it out on its own.
So we're not telling it what's a cat and what's a dog. It's got to figure out those categories itself.
Exactly. We talked about a few methods earlier, remember, like k-means, hierarchical clustering, DBS-GAN. I want to revisit those.
Yeah, refresh my memory.
Okay, so k-means clustering is like dividing data points into groups based on their proximity to certain centroids. Those centroids represent the average of each group. Like if we're grouping customers based on buying habits, the centroid is like the average customer in that group.
So it's kind of like those high school social circles. Everyone gravitates towards their own clique.
Perfect analogy. Now, hierarchical clustering creates a tree-like structure called a dendrogram. It starts with all the data points separate, then gradually merges them based on similarity until everything's in one big cluster.
Like building a family tree for data points showing how they're related?
Yep. And then DBS-GAN, that's like our density detective. It finds clusters based on how densely packed the data points are in different areas, like finding those hotspots in a city where people with similar interests hang out.
I'm liking these analogies. They make it so much easier to understand.
Good, good. And these clustering methods aren't just for customer segmentation. You can use them for analyzing gene expression data, grouping images, even finding anomalies in financial transactions.
The possibilities are endless, but I bet there are challenges with clustering too, right? Just like with classification.
Oh, definitely. One big one is figuring out how many clusters to create. It's not always obvious. And then there are outliers, those data points that don't fit neatly anywhere. They can mess things up sometimes.
Like those independent spirits who don't belong to any clique, they just do their own thing.
Uh-huh. Exactly. And like with classification, you got to evaluate the quality of those clusters. Are they meaningful? Do they give us useful insights?
It all depends on the context.
Right. It's not just about grouping things. It's about making sure those groupings make sense and tell us something useful.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Now, before we go further down this data mining rabbit hole, I want to emphasize something really important. Context.
Context.
Yeah, the same data can tell different stories depending on the context. Imagine a cluster of customers who buy a lot. In one context, they're your most loyal fans. But in another, they might be the ones most likely to leave if they don't see value.
So it's like being a detective. Right. You got to consider all the evidence before jumping to conclusions. Exactly. Data mining isn't just about the numbers. It's about the story behind those numbers. And speaking of stories, we're about to dive into even more fascinating data mining techniques. Ready for the next chapter?
Okay, lay it on me. What's next on our data mining adventure?
Let's talk about constraint-based data mining. This is where we get to be even more like detectives, using our knowledge and hunches to guide the search. Remember those constraints we saw in the question bank earlier?
Vaguely. It was back on page 25, right?
Yep.
Honestly, it kind of went over my head.
Yeah.
Could use a refresher.
Okay, imagine you're on a beach looking for a specific type of seashell. You wouldn't just pick up any random shell, right? You'd use what you know about it, its size, color, maybe even the type of seaweed it's usually near. Those are your constraints. They help you narrow down the search.
Okay, I see. So in data mining, we can use constraints to focus our search and find those really meaningful patterns.
Exactly. Say you're analyzing data for a music streaming service. You could use constraints to zero in on users who listen to a certain genre, maybe within a certain age range, or those who made specific playlists. It helps you find patterns that are way more relevant, more targeted.
So instead of just looking for any pattern, we're looking for patterns that fit a specific profile. It's like having a search warrant for our data.
Haha, love it.
Yeah.
And there are different types of constraints too. You can say what kind of knowledge you want, like associations or correlations. You can limit the data you look at, maybe focusing on a certain time period or place. You can even set a bar for how interesting a pattern needs to be.
It's like having all these filters for our data mining tools so we can fine-tune our search and get those really precise results. But how does this constraint-based stuff actually work in the real world? Got any examples?
Oh, tons. Think of a medical researcher studying heart disease. They could use constraints to focus on patients of a certain age, maybe those with certain diets, or those who exercise regularly. It's a much more targeted approach that helps them find stronger connections.
That makes a lot of sense. So constraint-based mining is like having a magnifying glass for our data exploration, right? Helps us zoom in on the stuff that really matters.
Precisely. We're not just gathering clues randomly anymore. We're using our experience and knowledge to guide the investigation. Now, speaking of investigations, we've talked a lot about finding patterns, making predictions, but there's another side to data mining that we can't ignore.
Oh, what's that?
The human element. Data mining is powerful, no doubt. But at the end of the day, it's just a tool. We have to remember that. The insights we get from the data, we got to interpret them carefully, apply them ethically, think about the human context.
So it's not just about the numbers, it's about the people behind the numbers.
Exactly. We've got to think about privacy, about potential biases in our data, about the ethical implications of the decisions we make based on those insights. Imagine a company using data mining to target ads based on super personal stuff or a hiring algorithm that accidentally discriminates against certain groups. That's not good.
Right, huge implications. Data mining can do so much good, but we got to use it responsibly. It's like having a superpower. You got to make sure you're using it for the right reasons.
Couldn't agree more. As data becomes more and more central to our lives, we have to approach data mining with responsibility, transparency, fairness, make sure our algorithms aren't perpetuating biases or invading people's privacy.
So it's not just about finding the patterns, it's about understanding what those patterns mean for real people and using them to make things better.
Exactly. That's where the human element comes in. Data mining can reveal incredible things, but it's up to us to use that knowledge wisely.
Wow, what a journey. We've gone from diapers and beer to the ethical implications of artificial intelligence. I feel like I've learned a ton about this data mining world.
And this is just the beginning. Data mining is constantly evolving. New techniques, new applications popping up all the time. It's an exciting field to be a part of, for sure.
So what's the one big takeaway we want listeners to leave with today?
Data is everywhere, and it's full of stories waiting to be uncovered. If we understand the basics of data mining, we can unlock those stories and get insights that can truly shape our world.
It's like having a key to a treasure chest full of knowledge and possibilities. Pretty amazing.
It is. So go out there, data explorers, and don't be afraid to dive in. Ask questions, be curious, and use your newfound knowledge to make a difference.
And remember, the best discoveries often come from the most unexpected places. So keep an open mind, keep exploring. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of data mining. It's been a blast.
Until next time.